Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you are new around here. Today I am back with a true crime video for you guys, so thank you so much for waiting so patiently for me over the past couple of weeks. I know I haven't uploaded in about 3 weeks, I think. So sorry, I hope you can forgive me, but I'm here today. And also, hopefully by the time I upload this video, we would have reached 700 subscribers. Yay! We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. I would love it if more of the true crime community could come over my way. So definitely make sure to click that subscribe button if you do enjoy this video today or you like true crime, because I upload true crime content. So in today's true crime video, we are covering a case that I had never even heard of before. I had never heard of this case until a couple of weeks ago when I listened to it on a podcast. So in today's video, we will be talking about the case of Christie Marceau. And before we get into the video, I just want to say, as I always do, I'm in no way professional. I don't work in any areas of crime investigation or law. I just simply like to review and talk about different crime cases from all over the world. And all this information is from online sources that are available to you guys and the general public. No disrespect is ever intended towards anyone I may mention in this video or any of my other videos for that fact. So with all that being said, let's just dive on into the case of Christie Marceau. Also, do you like the background? I added a little plant to the mix, and I'm sorry about these sheets. They're just like freshly washed and they're a little bit like crumpled from the dryer. I know it's not that aesthetically pleasing to look at, but I added a plant, so hopefully that makes up for it. So Christie Marceau was an 18-year-old girl living in Hillcrest, which is on the North Shore of New Zealand. At this time, she was almost finished her first year of uni. She attended Auckland University of Technology, where she studied event management, and she wanted to own her own events company one day, and her goal was to reach this dream by the age of 30. So that's a good and achievable dream, I think. She lived with her mother and father, Tracy and Brian, and she also had a sister, Heather, but she already lived out of home because she was older than her. So it was around 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 6th of September, 2011. Christie was actually sleeping in because she didn't have uni or work that morning, so she was just relaxing, sleeping in. Christie was suddenly awoken by the home phone. It started ringing and she woke up. She sort of got out of bed slowly to go answer it, but she actually missed it because she didn't get to it in time. The phone then started to ring again straight away after it had stopped, so she answered it and said hello. On the other end of the line, a male's voice started talking and he asked, "Can I speak to Christie?" And she said, "This is she. I am Christie." So it turned out the person on the other line was a acquaintance slash friend of Christie's, and his name was Akshay Chand. Christie knew Akshay Chand because they both worked together at the local supermarket. So they weren't like best friends by any means. They were sort of a bit more than acquaintances, I guess, but not really super close friends. According to Christie, she didn't think they were very close. They were just sort of work friends. They would occasionally talk outside of work, like on social media and things like that, if Akshay reached out to her. Akshay had been at Christie's house before. We'll also get into that soon. But again, they weren't super close friends by any means. Akshay and his family had immigrated to New Zealand from Fiji when he was just 4 years old, and he was described as a pretty intelligent guy. He was a little bit socially awkward. He didn't have a whole lot of friends, and he was said to be especially socially awkward with women. Akshay and Christie actually went to the same primary school together, but they were not friends and they didn't really know each other in primary school. They then went off to different high schools, so they like completely weren't associated with each other for many years until they came back together again, I guess, when they started working at the local supermarket for both their part-time jobs. So that is where we are at the current present timeline, and that's how they now know each other and have been reconnected. But again, they weren't really ever close friends, according to Christie. Akshay found Christie to be really nice, like a girl that he could talk to and felt comfortable with. He soon started confiding in her about a lot of his problems, like his depression and just things that he was struggling with. He would often confide in her about that. He complained a lot that he was not very close with his family and that he didn't know what he wanted to do with his future. I mean, they were both quite young, they were still teenagers, but he just felt lost, I guess, and that is a lot of the time what he talked to Christie about. He was quite depressed, he seemed very lost, and he wasn't close with his family. Christie was just one of those girls that wanted to help. She wanted to help everybody with their problems. She wanted everyone to be happy. She was, you know, a very sensitive and caring girl. She just wanted to help Akshay through his tough times and his problems and his depression phases as well. So she would be open and be happy to listen to all of Akshay's problem, kind of act like a shoulder to cry on. So that's why often they talked outside of work on social media, and occasionally he'd be at her house because he just was always looking for someone to confide in about his problems. So Christie, you know, was more than happy to help, but that's all that it was from my understanding. Christie actually ended up getting a new part-time job. So she left the supermarket, and when she left her job at the supermarket, she obviously started seeing a lot less of Akshay, and they talked less, obviously, as well. She thought that this was a good thing because she felt like Akshay was getting a little bit too intense for her. He was just always venting. It's very exhausting to have people venting to you all the time as well. So it was kind of a relief for her. You know, she saw him less, had to talk to him less. She was still happy to be there for him as a friend, but she just felt it was getting a little bit too intense, and she kind of felt like he was slightly obsessed with her. And from my understanding, I think maybe he had a little bit of a crush on her. Now they just talked every now and then. So back to the present timeline, Christie's picked up the phone and Akshay's on the other end. Akshay then told Christie that he had actually gotten 40 pills and crushed them up into a drink, and if she didn't come around to his house to talk to him right now, he was going to drink the drink and basically attempt to commit suicide or put himself in the hospital and be very sick. Christie didn't even think twice. She knew if Akshay was, you know, threatening suicide, then there was obviously something wrong. He was obviously going through a depressive stage at the moment, or his mental health was not very good at the moment. So she got up, just quickly chucked whatever clothes on that she could find and grabbed her car keys, jumped in the car and went straight over to Akshay's house. Akshay's house was a really quick drive away from Christie's house. She did drive, but she could have easily walked there. And once she arrived, she knocked on the door. Akshay opened the door and let her in. She followed Akshay into his apartment, and he gestured for Christie to sit down on a seat that was facing another seat. So there was like two seats facing each other, and she did see some white powder up on the countertop in the kitchen. So she thought, okay, right, he must be serious. He must have really actually crushed up these pills. So once Christie was seated, she could tell that there was something up with Akshay, like his demeanor had completely changed. He started rambling on about a bunch of crap that didn't really make sense. And he started talking about how he had some specific tasks that he wanted to complete that day. Again, Christie could tell, you know, there was something wrong, like his demeanor had changed. So she offered, you know, I think you should go get some professional help because I'm not a psychologist or a mental health professional. I think you should go seek some help so then someone can help you with your mental state and get better. Akshay was not very happy when Christie told him that he should maybe go seek help from a mental health professional. He had it in his mind that Christie was the one that should be helping him, not a mental health professional. He started telling Christie that ever since she'd left the supermarket, she had not been there for him. He started talking about how she wasn't being a good friend and how he really needed her and she wasn't there for him enough, and how, you know, all his problems were basically because of Christie, because Christie wasn't helping him enough and Christie wasn't giving enough support. Christie was obviously confused. I would be confused probably too. Christie just said, Akshay, look, I'm sorry, but I have a new job that I've been focusing on. I go to uni, so I have, you know, uni work and studies to focus on as well. And I also have my life. I'm sorry if I haven't been there enough for you, but I also need to focus on my life too. And that's why I'm saying you should go to a mental health professional because they have all the time to really help you, sit down and help you. Oh, sorry, I don't know if that's like actually what she said, but I'm just telling the story of what happened. He just went on and on, basically blaming Christie for his mental state and saying that she hadn't been there to support enough. she hadn't tried to be his friend. He said she hadn't contacted him on Facebook enough, blah, 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 as if it's her job to look after him. And sorry, like slightly off topic, but I'm sure many of you have come across people in your life that act like this. You can't expect to drain your own life to fix somebody else's problems. And people, shouldn't be so selfish to put their problems on your life. You have your own life that you're trying to figure out. You might be busy with work, study, relationships, anything. And of course you be, as much of a supportive friend or family member or partner as possible. However, you can't be expected to drop everything in your life just to go fix somebody else's problems. It's incredibly selfish on their part. And this is what Akshay's doing to Christie. And it's definitely not fair at all. And I feel terrible for Christie in this situation because she has been a shoulder to cry on and listened to Akshay's rants for some time now. Yet she's still getting blamed for his depressive episode that is happening now and being blamed for everything in his life. Akshay then starts telling her like, well, no, you haven't been that busy. Like, who are you to tell her if her life is busy or not? Do you live her life? I don't think so. Christie was starting to get a little bit nervous at this point, and I don't blame her. I would be too. He was still rambling and pressing her for answers as to why she hadn't been there for him enough. And she just kept saying, Akshay, you need to go get a mental health professional to help you through all of this. I'm not a mental health professional. I can't help you. I'm sorry. But he just continued to say that he didn't need help from a mental health professional. He needed her help instead. He then said that he had cervical cancer. Christie was like, you can't get cervical cancer, Akshay. He then changed his story and said that, oh no, like I don't have cervical cancer, obviously. I have prostate cancer. Like lying about having cancer is twisted. Christie knew that he was lying, obviously, and she thought the same thing. Like lying about having a serious terminal illness is not something funny to tell a friend or even an acquaintance or anyone. It's just nothing to joke about. And she said this to Akshay and he just like changed. He stood up from the chair that was like facing Christie and he stood over her, like loomed over her, and pulled out a knife from the back of his pants, like a big kitchen knife. Akshay told Christie and threatened her with the knife, saying if she made a fuss or a noise, then he would stab her. And Christie obviously started crying and panicking, which made Akshay mad. He then started rambling on about these particular things he wanted to accomplish that day. The first thing on the checklist that he wanted to do that day was to terrify Christie. So done. The second thing he wanted to do that day was get revenge on Christie for abandoning him. And the final thing he wanted to do was take his own life. Christie was still crying. Like, obviously she would have been so confused about what even was going on here. Akshay then told Christie to undress and give him her clothes that she was wearing. So a top, some tracky pants and a jumper, I think it was. Christie gave the jumper over, but then she refused to give Akshay her pants and her top because inappropriate. She did not want to sit in front of this guy in her underwear. But Akshay threatened Christie again with the knife and said that if she didn't give him all her clothes, then he would knife her. So she took off her top and her pants and handed them to Akshay, and he went and just put them away somewhere. Akshay then took a seat and started rambling once again about just random things, like jumping from one topic to another. Didn't make any logical sense. He started talking about how the devil had grabbed him once as a child and he's been battling evil ever since or something. He then told Christie people like her cause other people to suffer. Like, geez. So about half an hour had passed now in the apartment and Christie finally asked Akshay, are you going to kill me? Akshay didn't respond yes or no. He just went over his 3-step plan for the day again to scare Christie, to get revenge on her, and then to kill himself. He then told Christie that he was going to get revenge on her by raping her, which obviously made Christie extremely distressed and she started to cry and freak out. Akshay then told her to stop and was about to threaten her with the knife again. However, he suddenly just stopped and then he said that she could go. Christie was like confused, obviously, but she was also very cautious. Like she thought, if I turn my back and go to the door to get out, he's going to ambush me from behind with a knife or something. She didn't trust him. Akshay then went and retrieved Christie's clothes and her phone and handed them to Christie and told her that she could go. And Christie expressed her concerns to Akshay, and he just put the knife down on the table and put his hands up, kind of like a surrender, saying, I'm not going to stab you with your back turned. Just go. He did tell her, however, once she left the apartment, he was going to drink the drink. Despite everything that had happened in the past half hour, Christie actually tried to convince Akshay not to drink the drink or commit suicide. It wasn't worth it, but Akshay seemed to have made his mind up about drinking it, and Christie was not willing to stay any longer, so she got the hell out of there. Christie made it outside, she jumped in her car, she locked the doors and just sped out of the apartment complex and drove home. Once she had arrived home, Christie immediately told her grandmother, who also lived with them in the family home, and they then called Christie's mother, Tracy, to tell her immediately what happened and for her to come home from work. Once Tracy arrived home, Christie immediately ran over to her, gave her a massive hug, and just explained everything that had happened between her and Akshay Chand that morning. Tracy didn't know Akshay Chand very well. She definitely knew that Akshay was not one of Christie's close friends, but she did recall an incident that had happened where she and her daughter Christie had actually come home one day and they found Akshay to be just standing in their driveway at their front door alone. Tracy just got the worst vibes from Akshay Chand. She expressed that to her daughter as well. She said, Christie, please stop hanging out with Akshay. He just gives me the worst vibes and it just doesn't seem safe. Christie told her mum, like, no, mum, it's okay. He's just lonely and he just needs someone to talk to every now and then. Obviously, in this case, her mum was right. Tracy was obviously horrified at what her daughter had gone through with Akshay Chand in his apartment that morning, and they took her down to the police station to report this incident on Akshay. So whilst Christie was recounting the events of the morning to the police for a statement, she actually mentioned to them that she felt that Akshay Chand had been stalking her for a little while now. She told police that she had come home to find Akshay Chand out on her driveway or on her front doorstep multiple times. She'd also found a note from Akshay in her mailbox one day that basically like confessed his love to her, and she was certain that he had followed her home from like a dinner and drinks work breakup one time at night, and that's when he put the note in the mailbox. Apparently, when Christie quit her job at the supermarket, Akshay Chand quit on the same day, saying that if Christie wasn't working there, then what's the point of him being there? So obviously he was obsessed with her, and he obviously had romantic feelings for her that were not being reciprocated by Christie, and he knew this. So he was obviously harboring a lot of resentment and maybe anger towards Christie as well. So Christie was telling police, like, he's still out there. Can you please do something about this, because he's probably going to come back for me again. The police completely agreed with Christie, and they were worried that he was very unstable and that he might strike again. And they completely understood that Christie felt uncomfortable in her own home, in her neighborhood. So they went to Akshay's apartment to talk to him and most likely arrest him for what he had done to Christie. So the cops show up to Akshay's apartment complex where Christie said that he lived, and he was not there. It was just his mother home, and she had no idea where he was. So earlier, when Christie left the apartment, Akshay did drink his little concoction that he made, and it didn't kill him because it was just a bunch of multivitamins that he crushed up in a drink. So it didn't kill him, it just made him feel sick. His sister had then come home from school later in the day and found him, and he said that he needed an ambulance. So she called him an ambulance, they took him to the nearest hospital. When Akshay was in the hospital, he had an assessment done because he said that he felt depressed and unloved. He also talked about how he started feeling this way when he moved from the UK to New Zealand, and on top of that, he started feeling depressed when his parents announced that they were going to separate and most likely get a divorce. He was also fixated on capitalism after he read a German philosopher's paper about it, and it like consumed him after this. He was apparently so smart in school, like he was a very intelligent boy, but to everyone's surprise, he did not graduate his final year and did not go to university. I think from my research, his mother got him the job at the supermarket because he needed to work. He couldn't just do nothing if he wasn't going to be studying. And that's where he met Christie and started to vent about all his problems and his mental health and just sort of offloading everything onto her. The psych that assessed him diagnosed Akshay Chand with depression and suicidality, and Akshay actually did not even mention anything about what he had done to Christie Marceau earlier that morning, so they had no idea. The psych also made a note on Akshay's assessment saying, quote, "Some grandiose or entitled flavour to his discuss, also slightly narcissistic." So the cops managed to track Akshay Chand down. I'm assuming they found him because maybe it's like a protocol to call the local hospitals if they can't find someone, or maybe if Christie told them that he was planning to commit suicide, maybe they just assumed he would end up in hospital. They then interviewed him about what he had done to Christie, and basically to every single question, he just replied like, yeah. So he admitted to everything. The police then charged Akshay Chand with kidnapping, assault with intent to commit sexual violation, and threatening grievous bodily harm. When the cops asked him why he did this to Christie, he just said that he was furious and angry with Christie for not helping him with his depression. Like, okay, that's a bit of an ask. He also said his motive was just pure revenge and that he still wanted revenge. Keyword, still. Police also noted that he had never committed a crime before, so it was a bit of a step up from like no crime to then committing this kind of crime. So Christie and police sat down to make a very long statement explaining to the judge why Akshay should not be able to obtain bail. So they went over obviously Christie's concerns, how scared she was of him. She knew that he was going to come back for her because he still wanted revenge, which is what he said. And they also made a note of how close Christie and Akshay's houses were. They were literally like a short walking distance, and that was just not acceptable to have her attacker be so close to her house, in such close proximity to her. That was not fair on Christie's mental well-being and her safety. He had also admitted to all the offences, and he clearly still harboured a lot of anger towards Christie, so he was a danger and he just shouldn't be released. So a few days later, Akshay appeared in court, and his lawyer was saying that he should be able to have bail because of his age. He was only 18 years old, and because he had never had a prior conviction. They also argued that it was his mental state that led him to have this kind of episode, and that he would be having his medication soon. So he would be okay and he would no longer be a danger to society or Christie any longer. They also said that if Akshay was released on bail, that he would be with his mother supervised in the apartment at all times. The prosecution were like, like, are you joking? Akshay lived like less than a kilometre walk away from Christie's house, and he knew which house Christie lived in. The judge agreed that it was not okay for him to be living so close to Christie Marceau's house. However, they explained that because Akshay wasn't displaying any symptoms of psychosis, a mental health facility wouldn't take him. So where is he going to go? So the judge denied bail until Akshay had a full psychiatric and forensic assessment done, and then they would determine where he would go. After this, Christie was always worried. She didn't even like being in her own home, in her neighborhood. She couldn't even sleep in her own bed for a long while. She didn't like catching public transport anymore. She was just so worried that Akshay was out there watching her, following her. He might come for her family, or might even come for another girl and become fixated on her and put her in danger. She also started seeing a counsellor to deal with her stress and anxiety about Akshay Chand. So on the 5th of October, Akshay had a second hearing about whether he would be granted bail or not. Akshay had actually written a long letter expressing his remorse and that he wished that he didn't do what he did to Christie, and just saying that he wanted to make amends. Due to New Zealand's law at the time, the judge granted Akshay Chand bail because he was only 18 years of age and he had no prior convictions. He had very strict bail rules. He had a 24-hour curfew at his mother's house. He was not allowed to leave at any time unless it was a supervised medical or a legal appointment, even though he lived literally down the street from Christie Marceau and her family. The police were really, really disappointed with this outcome, but they wanted to do everything that they possibly could to keep the Marceaus safe. They would always go and check on Akshay at his apartment to make sure that he was following his bail rules. So about a month later in November, Christie Marceau was feeling a lot better in her life. She had less stress. I'm sure that she still suffered immensely from the PTSD, but her counsellor was really helping her through everything, trying to work out strategies on how to relieve her anxiety about the whole ordeal and being by herself in the house or outside in the community. She had plans of moving to Australia within the next few months, so she knew she was going to be like in a completely different country from Akshay. He could just be left in New Zealand and she wouldn't have to worry about anything, and she saw it as a fresh start with her family too. It was the morning of the 7th of November 2011. Christie and her mother Tracy were home. Tracy was getting ready for work, as she always did in the morning, just doing her normal morning things. Christie was up in bed. She was not up and about yet, and Tracy suddenly heard a knock on the front door, and she didn't think really anything of it. She just assumed it was the postman because Christie did a lot of online shopping, and the postman usually came at this kind of time in the morning, so she thought, right, it's another parcel. Because Christie wasn't up yet, because she had work later in the afternoon, Tracy answered the door. When she opened the door, it was not the postman, and she didn't realize who it was at first until suddenly she realized it was Akshay Chand standing at her front door holding a knife. Tracy was like a little bit in shock, and she just thought, oh my God, he's here, like at the house. She screamed as loud as she possibly could so she could try and awake Christie, who was sleeping in her room. Hopefully it would alert her that something bad has happened and she can get out of the house. Akshay threatened Tracy with the knife and asked who else was home, and Tracy, who was quick thinking, said that her husband was home, and Akshay said, no, he's not. So obviously Akshay Chand had been watching their house for some time and knew that Tracy's husband was not home, and he was right. The husband was not home. He was away for work. Christie then suddenly appeared at the top of the staircase because her mum's screams had woken her up and alarmed her. She then realized that Akshay Chand was at the front door with her mum holding a knife. She screamed, but she was just paralyzed with fear. She didn't know what to do. Akshay Chand then jumped forward and just kicked Christie straight in the gut or the chest, and it just sent her backwards tumbling down the stairs. She was a little disorientated, but she managed to get to her feet, and she just started running for her life down the rest of the stairs and out towards the backyard. Akshay then ran after Christie down the stairs and out towards the back garden, and Tracy picked up the phone and quickly called emergency services for assistance. Whilst Tracy was on the phone with emergency services, a scream came from the back garden, and she just immediately dropped the phone and ran out to the back garden to see what had happened. Upon arriving down in the garden, Tracy saw her daughter Christie lying on the deck in a pool of her own blood, so she rushed over to her and just held her daughter in her arms. Tracy said that she couldn't see any particular injury on Christie. She could just see the blood around her and knew that she couldn't move. Christie was really injured and was very much struggling to breathe, and a few moments later, Christie Marceau died in her mother's arms. So, where is Akshay Chand, you ask? Akshay was just standing in the garden, like a little bit away from them, just watching and staring. Like, how creepy and unsettling for both of them, for poor Tracy, the mother with the dying daughter in her arms, and what a sight, to see upon your death for poor Christie. Tracy could see that the knife was still in Akshay Chand's hand, and it was like bent at like a 90-degree angle. So it had bent when he had stabbed Christie. Tracy then just screamed at Akshay Chand saying, "You killed her, you killed Christie." And his response was, quote, "I'm glad." So around 10 minutes later, the police get there, and by this time, Akshay Chand had whipped out an iPod and was listening to music. Like, seriously, I wish I was joking, but he had dropped the knife, got an iPod out, and started listening to music. Like, how traumatizing for poor Tracy. Honestly, the police were familiar with the case already, so they knew who Akshay Chand was, I'm assuming, and they went over to him and asked him, "Why are your hands shaking?" And his response was, quote, "It's not easy to kill someone, is it?" So he just incriminated himself. I mean, even though he had blood all over him and he had a knife, but he said that he killed her. So they arrested him and took him away from the police station. Good riddance. That is just the strangest thing I've ever heard. So the crime scene was established at the home by police, and it was determined that Christie had been stabbed between 10 and 15 times, and they were all in like the head and the back. And because he attacked her from the back, there was so much force with the knife in his hand that it had bent at a 90-degree angle. It was said that the first wound that was inflicted on Christie was so bad that she most likely didn't feel any further stab wounds that she sustained. Of course, I cannot speak for Christie. I don't know if she did feel them or not, but that's just the information I heard on one of the podcasts and a couple of readings that I read. Akshay Chand was cool, calm, and collected in the police interview. He didn't seem like he had any remorse, and he said that he had actually planned to kill Christie for some time now, ever since he was incarcerated before he was let out on bail, I believe, so like months prior. He basically faked remorse in his letter to the judge so that he could be granted bail so he could get to Christie and kill her. He knew that he couldn't strike straight away because it would be too obvious. He knew the police were going to come and do their random checks on him to make sure that he was adhering to his bail rules. So he waited and waited and waited. Every time the police came, he was there. It looked like he was following the rules. And then he suddenly striked on the Marceau family. Where was Akshay's mother, you ask, who was supposed to be supervising him at all times? Well, she had to work a lot and couldn't supervise him all the time. And his sister was scared of him, so she didn't stay at the home a lot. She went and stayed at a friend's house. So no one was supervising him. Akshay said that he had nothing to lose and nothing to gain, so what did it matter if he killed someone? He said that he chased Christie down the stairs, through the house and into the back garden, and managed to catch up with her because she was fumbling with like a gate latch. She couldn't get it undone, and I'm assuming she was trying to open the gate to get out onto the outside of her house. And that's when he caught up to her and stabbed her with the knife. Then, as we know, Akshay just stood and watched and unfortunately listened to music while Tracy tried to care for her daughter. Akshay Chand said that Christie deserved to die because, quote, "She let me down." Like, oh my God, what the fuck, honestly, like, get a life. Police then charged Akshay Chand with murder, and Akshay didn't even bother applying for bail this time because he knew he wasn't getting that. Tracy expressed that she had a lot of guilt for opening the door that day to her daughter's attacker. She said she wished she had have realised that it was Akshay Chand earlier and protected her daughter more. She was tormented with all these thoughts about not protecting her daughter enough, and that's how she felt. And she really struggled to give police interviews without having medication and things like that. A funeral was also held for Christie Marceau, and a lot of people in the community attended, and it was a lovely funeral apparently. Akshay's trial was set for October the following year, and police were definitely convinced that he was going to be convicted with this charge because he admitted to it, and he admitted to the previous one as well, so he was up for like 2 things. Suddenly, out of the blue, Akshay changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. Akshay had had multiple assessments done by many different doctors ever since the first attack on Christie, and he had always said in all his interviews and assessments that he had never had any psychosis or psychotic symptoms. He'd never heard voices in his head or ever had hallucinations or anything like that. He was then assessed by the country's leading psychiatrist, and Akshay admitted to this psychiatrist a detail that he had not shared with any previous doctors before. Akshay said in January 2011, he started to hear a woman's voice in his head, and he said that this woman's voice in his head was clearer in the morning than in the afternoon or evening. He then identified the voice in his head to be the voice of a girl that he went to school in the UK with, and her name was Pauline. The voice in his head said that he needed to kill someone because he was possessed by the devil, and the voice would often tell him that he needed to kill Christie, and not only Christie, but her mother Tracy as well. Akshay tried not to listen to the voice, but it overpowered him, he said, and he committed the act. Once Akshay started taking the medication he was given, he was reviewed again by the same psychiatrist, and they asked him, do you still hear the voices in your head? And Akshay said no. This psychiatrist believes that Akshay Chand has schizophrenia. This psychiatrist also believes that Akshay was psychotic in that moment he killed Christie, and he didn't know that it was morally wrong. This psychiatrist believes that Akshay Chand was not in a psychotic state on the first attack he did on Christie, because his mental illness was in the more earlier stages, and he stopped the attack and let Christie go because he could see morally what was right from wrong. Another psychiatrist confirmed that Akshay Chand was legally insane at the time of the murder, or that's what they thought. And then a third psychiatrist was asked to do an assessment, and they said the same thing, and that he was or couldn't be held responsible for the crime that he committed, so he would not be going to trial. And Christie's parents and family were obviously devastated by this. So on September 27th, 2012, Akshay Chand pleaded guilty to the charges of kidnapping, assault with intent to commit sexual violation, and threatening to do grievous bodily harm, and a month later he was back in court for the insanity hearing. Akshay Chand was sentenced to be detained indefinitely at the Mason Clinic, which is a psychiatric facility or a secure unit, as it's also known, in Auckland, New Zealand, and the only way he will ever be released is if he is found to be no longer a threat to the community. He was then sentenced to 3 years for the kidnapping, 2 years of the assault with intent to commit sexual violation, and 1 year for threatening grievous bodily harm, which were also to be served at the Mason Clinic. So that brings us to the end of this case. What did you guys think of this one? No one deserves to die and be murdered because they, quote, let you down. That's just absolutely ridiculous to me. It was all in his head. He was very unwell, and he just had it in his head that Christie, it was her fault for not fixing his problems, which is just, completely selfish. And, it just was such an unfair situation from her, and her life was taken away from her at such a young age. She had the whole world ahead of her, and it was just taken away. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, respectively, of course. I would love to discuss with you. And if you have any other recommendations for true crime cases that you'd like to hear on my channel, please feel free to comment them down below as well, or DM me on my Instagram, or email me any suggestions. My contact information is always in the description box. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching my video today, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye.